Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and today I'm joined by Brandon Showalter. How's it going today, Brandon?
It's going well, Billy. Doing well.
All right, so there are a lot of developments going on right now in the gender battle. You and I have talked many times about this issue, and I wanted to bring you on because there's actually been a very large development, notable development in the United Kingdom. Earlier this month, the UK banned new prescriptions of puberty blockers to treat, and this is how the media refers to it. I'm looking at an NBC story right now, to quote, treat minors for gender dysphoria. We'll get into all of that, but let's start with this ban. Talk a little bit about what's going on in the UK right now.
Well, the UK has been very much among Western nations, kind of the leader in the pushback against gender ideology more broadly, but particularly medicalization of gender dysphoric youth. I think it's debatable whether or not these kids are truly distressed about their gender in light of the documented evidence of a social contagion and the ideological indoctrination into trans ideology in the schools. But yes, their National Health Service has banned puberty blockers, I believe, at least until 2027. There have been some developments in the UK for a number of years. The most recent of which was the CAS report, this 400-page approximately report led by a very well regarded pediatrician who, in response to a 2020 judicial review featuring detransitioner Kira Bell, who was trans at the Tavistock in London, since been closed. There was this lengthy several-year ordeal where they were doing the review of the evidence, and it was just published and found that the evidence is remarkably weak for treating gender confusion with hormones and surgery and that kind of thing. And so with the blockers, there was a pause on them, and now it looks like they've made that more permanent, no new prescriptions. And so it only kind of confirms what we have known for many years, people like me who've been reporting on this for 7-8 years, that you do not block a normal, natural developmental process, puberty, with high-powered chemicals in pursuit of something that's physiologically impossible. And so the youth had their reasons for a number of years, and there's been greater pushback amongst radical feminists and women's rights activists and others who have been raising the alarm. And so it's an important development. Sadly, unfortunately, though there has been some pivoting here in the United States of late, the UK appears to be well ahead of us, as are some other European nations who have dialed back, Sweden, Finland, and other places where they're seeing that there's just no there, and their medical associations have backtracked from this treatment protocol, if you can even call it that.
I mean, when you look at this and you're watching the UK, as you said, be sort of the leader now in pulling back on this, right now, America is in the throes of it. In some quarters, I think in the parental quarters, in social quarters, there are a lot of people who are waking up to how nefarious all of this has been, but there are others who are digging in on this as well. What impact do you think this will have in the UK on America and our policies here?
Well, it's hard to say. I know that Justice Alito did, for example, cite the CAS report, the medical report that I just mentioned, during the Supreme Court hearing that took place on December 4th in the U.S. versus Grimetti matter, which centered on Tennessee's law that prohibited these trans medical practices on minor. That's approximately half the states have some version of that law. I think 2 states just have a ban on the surgeries, but some states have bans on the blockers, hormones, and the surgery. And so that was referenced. Whether or not that will have any impact on the ruling, that remains to be seen. One of the things that was, when Alito brought that up, though, was that they found that these treatments did not reduce suicide. And the ACLU lawyer who was arguing alongside the U.S. government had to backtrack and say, well, it doesn't reduce completed suicide, but suicidality. And so that's been the core claim of trans activists, is that these blockers and hormones keep trans-identified young people from killing themselves. And so to see that fall apart during oral arguments was big. I think the major change that's going to happen, and we'll see what may occur with the incoming presidential administration, will be when we continue to see lawsuits against doctors and medical malpractice. And if it becomes too much of a liability risk, that's happened in the state of Missouri. Until the academic medicine types in the professional organizations, such as the American Academy of Pediatrics or the Endocrine Society, until there's a reckoning at that professional level and people are forced to face the music there, those have been the institutions that enshrined this dogma in higher places and have furthered this madness nationwide. So what that will, I don't know. I know there have been doctors that have been trying to force that change in those institutions. It's like pushing a 500-pound boulder up a hill. But frankly, I think we're overdue for a reckoning. And analysts like me and others are going to continue to push back against this medicalization. I've got a column today chastising the Washington Post for now arguing for more robust science and that kind of thing. But they've
Can I
carried
wait? I have
this
to.
for
I wanted
years.
to talk to you about that, and I've
Yeah,
got to ask you that. That is wild to me. And you wrote this column. Before
yeah.
we go anywhere else, has the Washington Post at any point up until now, up until recently, done anything in the realm that you would consider the right thing when it comes to children and this gender issue?
The most I will give them is that they have occasionally allowed a few cautious words of criticism to appear in their pages. I believe they call that a limited hangout, which I say that in my column today. They did allow Corinna Cohn, who underwent sex change surgery, to express his regret about undergoing that. So, okay, here and there. But by and large, they have furthered so much deception about what this is, dating back even, and I had plenty of hyperlinks to show that they've been at this for years, even back at 2012. They have been furthering the gender cause for, over a decade. And so now they're acting like they want to be all sweet and reasonable and let's just engage the science and not, don't want the religious groups from the red states to make laws against this. We just can't have that. No, they want scientific integrity now. But frankly, that's what those religious red state rubes have been saying for all these years. But their red state religious rubes are not allowed to be right. You see, those are the rules, and so it seems. And so I was just pretty irritated, and I was saying, look, you guys have carried water for this. You guys have promoted this ideology as though it's fact based and scientific, and now that the issue has been forced all the way up to the Supreme Court, and most people think that the justices are going to allow Tennessee's law to stand. And the question will be, how strong will the ruling be? Now they realize that the proverbial writing is on the wall. And so they're trying to memory hole their enthusiastic support for this cause. And frankly, I'm not having it because I've been in the trenches for close to 8 years. And if they only knew just how this has shattered families and, led to so many children being irreversibly sterilized and surgically maimed, they've chosen not to scrutinize this until they absolutely had to. And so if they want to come clean about this and fess up, well, okay. But you're Johnny come lately, and that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an important issue. You've been at the forefront of this, and your podcast, Generation Indoctrination, you've gone so deep on so many different facets of it, and we've had a chance to talk about it on the Inside Story as well. I know this is difficult. You don't have a crystal ball, but if you were going to predict out based on what we've seen in this recent election, in the culture right now, the patterns you're seeing, when it comes to the social aspect of this, the feelings that Americans have on this issue,
Mhm.
do you think we're turning a corner towards the public pushing back more on this issue as well?
There's no question that it had some effect on the election. The blueprint data, which is the Democratic polling analysis, showed that among swing state voters, it affected it by 28 points. It was the top issue for those who voted against Vice President Harris. Now, I don't think that was the only reason, but clearly the Trump campaign very successfully used that argument of all the gender craziness going on as it's sort of during its closing days. They had it fresh on people's minds when they went to the ballot box, which proved to be pretty effective. Yes, I think the tide is turning, but I say that with a lot of caution because some people who work in this space have been saying that very line, tide is turning, for the last couple of years, and it's gone on longer than I think a lot of us ever thought it would. And so while I think the election did, you know, underscore a turning tide, I'm not going to celebrate prematurely until I see the ink dry on some substantial moves, whether that's in the executive branch with some orders or legislation or with court rulings. I mean, This is so baked into all of our institutions. It's going to take some time to extricate the tentacles of it for a while, but we are certainly headed in a good direction, and the world is certainly a different place on this issue today, than it was 1 or 2 years ago. I mean, it's unrecognizable how much the awareness has increased. And once people find out about it, normies, as we might say, are absolutely horrified. And so, as one who's been at this for a lot longer, and it just took a lot of time to get people to believe the horrible things that were happening, it feels very vindicating. But again, I'm not going to get the cart before the horse and count my chickens before they hatch. And until we see some substantial things accomplished, I'm going to continue to act as though we are 10 points down. But there's no question we're going in the right direction.
I'm laughing because of the term normies. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think this is an important issue. It's an important issue, not just from a news perspective, but from a spiritual perspective for Christians to be understanding. And that's why we have talked so much about it. You can't talk enough about it when you have the sorts of things you document routinely going on. And your most recent column, people can read over at the Christian Post. Any final words, Brandon? Because I know this is an issue you're passionate about. If people are listening to this and maybe they don't know a lot about it, maybe they're just hearing, this conversation. They obviously have heard it in the media, but they don't really know what to do, how to react, how to take action. What would your advice be to them?
Well, I would say to them, you should disabuse yourself of the notion that this is somehow a small, unimportant issue. And a population of 330 million people, it's only affecting a few kids, by comparison, a very percentage. And I would just ask you, isn't it an outrage that one 12-year-old girl has her breasts amputated? We should treat it as though it's like a child being raped. It's that severe. These are medical atrocities. It's a medical scandal. This is ripping apart families. But even more broadly, this ideology is everywhere. So it's not a small issue. It's in the schools. It's in the hospitals. It's in our prisons. I just had lunch yesterday with 3 women who were formerly incarcerated, and they have been locked up in their cells with men who claim to. There is nowhere to escape from it. This is in the documents you fill out. This is affecting how people gather statistics. People can change their gender markers or sex markers on their driver's licenses. It's like this is a totalitarian, pathological creed. And you do not fall into the temptation that this is somehow small and unimportant. I think it distresses a lot of normies because when you're forced to lie about something as basic as our biological sex, it sort of, the phrase I have said is that it throws people off their center of gravity. It's like being forced to say that you think the world is flat. And the moment that you lend credence to the lie is the moment that you have lost. But the medical scandal of cutting off the healthy body parts of children and rendering them sterile, I just don't know how anybody, once you see that, can unsee that and look away. This is the worst medical scandal of our time, but it's particularly pernicious because it's wrapped up, unlike previous medical scandals, in children's sense of identity. So we've got young people concurrently being ideologically brainwashed into believing that their bodies are somehow wrong, while being convinced that the harm that's being done to them is actually health. I've never seen or heard of a medical scandal where that is a crucial aspect of it. So it's warping our children's minds as it destroys their bodies. And that's just, how can you not care about that?
Brandon, I appreciate that passionate conclusion there. This is important for people to be thinking about, speaking out on, and for believers to be praying about. I appreciate you joining us today to break it all down as usual.
Thank you, Billy. Appreciate it as always.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to the Christian Post. You can read Brandon's work there. Also check out Generation Indoctrination wherever podcasts are heard. And we will see you again next week for another episode of The Inside Story.